Hello, and welcome to the reading of the novel The Lemonade War. And it is written by Jacqueline Davies, and the reading level is fourth grade, first month. And then the interest level is third through sixth grades. There are 14 chapters in this book. Today I am reading chapters 1 through 3. Chapter 1, Slump. Slump is a noun, a drop in the activity of a business or the economy. Evan lay on his back in the dark, throwing the baseball up in a straight line and catching it in his bare hands. Thwop, thwop! The ball made a satisfying sound as it slapped his palm. His legs flopped in a V. His arms stretched up to the ceiling, and the thought that if he missed, he'd probably break his nose made the game just interesting enough to keep going. On the floor above, he heard footsteps, his mother's, and then a long, loud, scraping, groaning sound. He stopped throwing the ball to listen. His mother was dragging something heavy across the kitchen floor, probably the broken air conditioner. A week ago, right at the beginning of the heat wave, the air conditioner in his mother's attic office had broken. The man from Sears had installed a brand new one, but left the old one sitting right in the middle of the kitchen floor. The Trakis had been walking around it all week. Scrape! Evan stood up. His mother was strong, but this was a two-person job. Hopefully, she wouldn't ask him why he was hiding in the dark basement. And hopefully, Jessie wouldn't be in the kitchen at all. He'd been avoiding her for 2 days now, and it was getting harder by the minute. The house just wasn't that big. Evan had his hand on the railing when the scraping noise stopped. He heard footsteps fading to silence. She'd given up. Probably the heat, he thought. It was that kind of weather, giving up kind of weather. He went back to lying on the floor. Thwop, thwop! Then he heard the basement door open. Psh! Evan caught the ball and froze. Evan? Jessie's voice sounded echoey in the darkness. Evan? You down there? Evan held his breath. He lay completely still. The only thing that moved was the pins and needles prickling in his fingers. He heard the door start to close. Long breath out. But then it stopped and opened again. Footsteps on the carpeted stairs. A black outline of Jessie standing on the bottom step with daylight squirting all around her. Evan didn't move a muscle. Evan, is that you? Jessie took one short step into the basement. Is that? She inched her way toward him, then kicked him with her bare foot. Hey, watch it, would ya? Said Evan, swatting her leg. He suddenly felt stupid lying there in the dark. I thought you wore a sleeping bag, she said. I couldn't see. What are you doing down here? How come the lights are off? It's too hot with the lights on, he said. He talked in a flat voice, trying to sound like the most boring person on the whole planet. If he kept it up, Jessie might just leave him alone. Mom's back in her office, said Jessie, lying down on the couch. Working. She groaned as she said the word. Evan didn't say anything. He went back to throwing the ball. Straight up, straight down. Maybe silence would get Jesse to leave. He was starting to feel words piling up inside him, crowding his lungs, forcing out all the air. It was like having a chest full of bats beating their wings, fighting to get out. She tried to move the air conditioner, but it's too heavy, said Jesse. Evan tightened up his lips. Go away, he thought. Go away before I say something mean. It's gonna be hot all week, Jesse continued. In the 90s, all the way up till Labor Day. Thwop, thwop. So what'd you want to do? Jesse asked. Scream, thought Evan. Jesse never got it when you were giving her the big freeze. She just went right on acting as if everything was great. It made it really hard to tell her to bug off without telling her to bug off. Whenever Evan did that, he felt bad. So what'd you want to do? Jessie asked again, nudging him with her foot. It was a direct question. Evan had to answer it or explain why he wouldn't. And he couldn't get into that. It was too complicated, too hurtful. Huh? So what'd you want to do? She asked for the third time. Doing it, said Evan. Nah, come on, for real. For real, he said. We could ride our bikes to the 7-Eleven, she said. No money, he said. You just got $10 from Grandma for your birthday. Spent it, said Evan. On what? Stuff, Evan said. Well, Jesse's voice dribbled down to nothing. Evan stopped throwing the ball and looked at her. What? Jessie pulled her legs tight to her chest. Nothing, she said. Right, said Evan. He knew that Jessie had money. Jessie always had money, squirreled away in her lockbox. But that didn't mean she wasn't going to share it. Evan went back to throwing the baseball. He felt a little tiny flame of anger shoot up and lick his face. Thwop, thwop. We could build a fort in the woods, said Jessie. Too hot. We could play Stratego. Too boring. We could build a track and race marbles. Too stupid. A thin spider web of sweat draped itself over his forehead, spreading into his hair. With every throw, he told himself, it's not her fault. But he could feel his anger growing. He started popping his elbow to put a little more juice on the ball. It was flying a good 4 feet into the air every time. Straight up, straight down. Pop, thwop, pop, thwop. The bats in his chest were going nuts. What is the matter with you? Asked Jessie. You've been so weird the last couple of days. Aw, man, here they come. I just don't want to play a dumb game like Stratego, he said. You like Stratego. I only picked that because it's your favorite game. I was being nice, in case you hadn't noticed. Look, there are only 6 days left of summer, and I'm not going to waste them playing a dumb game. Evan felt his heartbeat speed up. Part of him wanted to stuff a sock in his mouth, and part of him wanted to deck his sister. It's a stupid game and it's for babies, and I don't want to play a stupid baby game. Pop, thwop, pop, thwop. Why are you being so mean? Evan knew he was being mean, and he hated being mean, especially to her. But he couldn't help it. He was so angry and so humiliated and so full of bats. There was nothing else he could be except alone. And she'd taken even that away from him. You're the genius, he said. You figure it out. Good. That would shut her up. For once. Evan watched the ball fly in the air. Is this because of the letter? Jessie asked. Crack! Evan had taken his eyes off the ball for 1 second, just for 1 second, and the ball came crashing down on his nose. Crud! Oh, crud! He curled over into his side, grabbing his nose with both hands. There was a blinding, blooming pain right behind his eyes that was quickly spreading to the outer edges of his skull. Do you want some ice? He heard Jessie ask in a calm voice. What'd you think? He shouted. Yeah? She stood up. No, I don't want any stupid ice. The pain was starting to go away, like a humongous wave that crashes with a lot of noise and spray, but then slowly fizzes away into nothing. Evan rolled to a seating position and took his hands away from his nose. With his thumb and index finger, he started to pinch the bridge. Was it still in a straight line? Jessie peered at his face in the dim light. You're not bleeding, she said. Yeah, well, it hurts, he said. A lot. It's not broken, she said. You don't know that, he said. You don't know everything, you know. You think you do, but you don't. It's not even swollen. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Evan held his nose with one hand and hit his sister's knee with the other. Then he picked up the baseball and struggled to his feet. Leave me alone. I came down here to get away from you, and you just had to follow. You ruined everything. You ruined my summer, and now you're going to ruin school. I hate you. When he got to the bottom of the steps, he threw the baseball down in disgust. Thud. Chapter 2. Breakup. That word is a noun. The dissolution of a unit, an organization, or a group of organizations. The Justice Department sometimes forces the breakup of a large corporation into several smaller companies. Jessie didn't get it. She just didn't get it. What was Evan's problem? He'd been acting like a weirdo for 2 days now, and it was 2 days ago when the letter had arrived. But why would he be so upset about that letter? This is a puzzle, Jessie told herself, and I'm good at puzzles. But it was a puzzle about feelings, and Jessie knew that feelings were her weakest subject. Jessie sat in the cool darkness of the basement and thought back to Monday, the day the letter had come. Everything had been normal. She and Evan were putting together a lemonade stand in the driveway when the mailman walked up and handed Jessie a bundle of letters. Evan never bothered to look at the mail, but Jessie was always entering contests and expecting to win. So she flipped through the letters right away. Boring, 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 said Jessie as each letter flashed by. Hey, something from school. addressed to Mom. She held up a white plain envelope. What do you think it is? Don't know, said Evan. He was in the garage, uncovering the small wooden table they usually used for a stand. It was buried under 2 snow tubes, 2 boogie boards, and the garden hose. Jesse watched while Evan gave a mighty pull and lifted the table up over his head. Wow, he's gotten so big, thought Jesse, remembering what Mom had said about Evan's growth spurt. Sometimes Jessie felt like Evan was growing twice as fast as she was, growing up, growing away. It looks important, said Jessie. It looks like bad news is what she thought in her head. Was there a problem? A complaint? A mix-up? All the nervousness she'd been feeling about skipping to 4th grade suddenly burbled up inside her. This table's really dirty, said Evan. Do you think we can just cover it with a lot of cups and the pitcher and no one will notice? Jessie looked. The table was streaked with black. No. Evan groaned. I'll clean it, said Jessie. Evan had only agreed to have a lemonade stand because it was one of her favorite things to do. The least she could do for him was clean the gunk off the table. Maybe, she said, holding up the envelope again. Maybe they're postponing school. Maybe the first day isn't going to be next Tuesday. You think? That got Evan's attention. Let's ask Mom to open it, he said. Up in the humming cool of her office, Mrs. Tresky read the letter through once. Well, she said, this is a curveball. She looked right at Evan. Jessie thought her face looked worried. Evan, you and Jessie are going to be in the same class this year. You'll both have Mrs. Overton. Jessie felt relief flood her entire body. The same class? If she could have wished for one thing in the whole world, that's what she would have wished for. She would be with Evan, and Evan would make everything easier. He would introduce her to all those 4th graders. He would show them all that she was okay. Not some puny 2nd grader who didn't really belong. But Evan didn't look happy. He looked angry. Why? He asked in an almost shouting voice. Mrs. Tresky scanned the letter. Well, the classes were small to start with, and now some of the 4th graders they thought would be attending aren't because they're moving or switching to private schools. So they need to combine the 2 small classes into one bigger class. That is so unfair, said Evan. I wanted Mrs. Scobie, and I don't want... He looked at Jessie. That is so unfair. Jessie was surprised. This was great news. Why didn't Evan see that? They always had fun together at home. Now they could have fun in school, too. It'll be fun, she said to Evan. It will not be fun, said Evan. School isn't fun. And then he stomped downstairs and locked himself in his room for the rest of the afternoon. They never finished the lemonade stand. And here it was, 2 days later, and Evan was still all locked up, even though he wasn't in his room. He wouldn't talk to her, and he wouldn't even play with her. So Jessie went up to her room and did what she always did when she was upset or angry or sad or confused. She started reading Charlotte's Web. She had read the book about 100 times. She was at the good part, the happy part, Wilbur had just been named some pig, and he was getting all kinds of attention from the Zuckermans and the whole town. But Jessie couldn't settle into that happy feeling, the one that usually came when Charlotte said, I dare say a trick will work and Wilbur's life can be saved. Instead, she kept noticing an unhappy feeling tap, tap, tapping on her shoulder. And it wasn't the unhappy feeling that came from knowing that Charlotte was going to die on page 171. It was Evan. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. Jessie could only remember one other time that Evan had said, I hate you, to her. Grandma had been over, and Evan needed help with his math homework. He had that frustrating, screwed up mouth look that he sometimes got with math or spelling or writing reports. Mom called it his he's gonna blow look. But Grandma couldn't help him because it was all Greek to her. So Jessie had shown him how to do each problem. Well, she just sort of jumped in and done the problems for him. That was helping, wasn't it? Grandma had called her a girl genius. But Evan had ripped his paper in half and ran upstairs shouting, I hate you! Just before slamming his door. That was last year. Jessie rested the book on her stomach and stared at the ceiling. People were confusing. She'd rather do 100 math problems than try to figure out someone else's mixed up feelings any day of the week. That's why she and Evan got along so well. He would just tell her straight out, I'm mad at you because you ate the last Rice Krispie treat. And then she would say, sorry, hey, I've got some Starbursts in my room. You want them? And that would be that. Evan was a straight shooter. Not like the girls at school, the ones who had started that club. She rolled over into her side to get away from those thoughts. Across the room, against the opposite wall, she noticed the 3 pieces of foam core her mom had bought for Jessie's Labor Day project. Every year, the Rotary Club sponsored a competition for kids to see who could come up with the best display related to the holiday. This was the first year Jessie was old enough to participate, and she had begged her mom to buy foam core and gel pens and fluorescent paper and special stickers for her display. She was determined to win the prize money, $100. But she hadn't been able to come up with a single idea that seemed good enough. So here it was, just 5 days before the competition, and the foam core was still completely blank. Jessie reached for her book. She didn't want to think about the girls at school, and she didn't want to think about the competition. She started reading again. Wilbur and Charlotte were at the fair, and Charlotte was beginning to show her age. Jessie read the words that Wilbur said to his best friend. I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Charlotte. Perhaps if you spin a web and catch a couple of flies, you'll feel better. Well, the second part didn't apply at all, but Jessie imagined herself saying the first line. I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Evan. It sounded about right. At least it would show him that she cared. And Jessie knew that this was important when someone was feeling upset. She decided to go downstairs and give it a try. She would do just about anything to get Evan back to the way he was before the letter. Jessie looked in the kitchen and the backyard. No Evan. She was halfway down the steps to the basement when she heard a noise coming from the garage. She opened the door and felt the full heat of the day on her skin. It was like some giant had blown his hot, stinky breath on her. In the garage, she found Evan and Scott Spencer. Weird, she thought. Evan doesn't even like Scott Spencer. They'd been on again, off again, friends from kindergarten. But ever since Scott had purposefully put Evan's bike helmet under the wheel of the Tretzky's minivan so that Mrs. Tretzky ran over it when she backed out, the friendship had definitely been off. Jessie looked from Evan to Scott and back again. Now she had no idea what to say. I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Evan. Didn't seem to make much sense when Evan was obviously having fun with his friend. She tried to think of something else to say. All she could come up with was, "What are you doing?" The boys were bent over a piece of cardboard. Evan was writing letters with a skinny red felt-tipped pen. The purple cooler was in the middle of the garage, and two plastic chairs were stacked on top of it. On the top chair was a brown paper bag. "Nothing," said Evan, not even looking up. Jessie walked over to the boys and peered over Evan's shoulder. She said, "You spelled lemonade wrong. It's an O, not an I." But she thought, "Oh, good. A lemonade stand. My favorite thing to do." The boys didn't say anything. Jessie saw Evan's mouth tighten up. "You want me to make the lemonade?" she asked. "Already made," said Evan. "I could decorate the sign," she said. "I'm good at drawing butterflies and flowers and things." Scott snorted. "Huh? We don't want girl stuff like that on our sign." "Do you want to use my lockbox to keep the money in? It's got a tray with separate compartments for all the different coins." "Nope," said Evan, still working on the sign. "Well," she said, looking around, I can clean the table for you." The small wooden table, still covered in black streaks, was pushed up against the bikes. "We're not using it," said Evan. "But we always use the table for a stand," said Jessie. Evan pushed his face in her direction. "We don't want it." Jessie took a couple of steps back. Her insides felt runny, like a fried egg that hasn't been cooked enough. She knew she should just go back into the house, but for some reason, her legs wouldn't move. She stood there, her bare feet rooted to the cool cement. Scott whispered something over to Evan, and the two boys laughed, low and mean. Jessie swayed towards the door, but her feet stayed planted. She couldn't stand it that Evan wanted to be with Scott, who was a real jerk, more than her. "Hey," she said, "I bet you need change. I've got a ton. You could have all my change, as long as you pay it back at the end of the day." "Don't need to. Don't need it," said Evan. "Yeah, you do," insisted Jessie. "You always need change, especially in the beginning. You'll lose sales if you can't make change." Evan capped the pen with a loud snap and stuck it in his pocket. "Scott's bankrolling us. His mom keeps a change jar, so we've got plenty." The boy stood up. Evan held the sign for Scott to read, turning his back on Jessie. "Awesome," said Scott. Jessie knew that the sign was not awesome. The letters were too small and thin to read from a distance. Evan should have used a fat marker instead of a skinny felt tip pen. Everybody knew that. There wasn't any pretty decorations to attract customers, and the word lemonade was spelled wrong. Why wouldn't Evan take a little help from her? She just wanted to help. Scott turned to her and said, "Are you really going to be in the fourth grade this year?" Jessie's back stiffened. "Yep," she said. "Wow, that is so freaky." "It's not," she said, sticking her chin out. "Is too," said Scott. "I mean, you're a second grader, and now you're going to be a fourth grader. That's just messed up." Jessie looked at Evan, but he was busy taping the sign to the cooler. "Lots of people skip grades," said Jessie. "It's not that big a deal." "It's completely weird," said Scott. "I mean, you miss everything from a whole year. You missed the whole unit on Antarctica, and that was the best. And the field trip to the aquarium, and the thing where we sent letters all over the country. Remember that, Evan? You got that letter from Alaska. That was so cool." Evan nodded, but he didn't look up. "It's not that big a deal," said Jessie again, her voice stretched tight like a rubber band. "It's like you miss a whole year of your life," Scott said. "It's like you're gonna die a whole year earlier than the rest of us because you never had third grade." Jessie felt cold and hot at the same time. Part of her wanted to yell, "That doesn't make any sense." But the other part of her felt so freakish, like Scott had just noticed she had 3 legs. Evan stood up and tossed the paper bag to Scott. Then he grabbed the plastic chairs with one hand. "Come on, let's go." He reached down to grab one handle of the cooler. Scott grabbed the other, and together they lifted it and began to walk out of the garage. "Hey, Evan," said Jessie, calling to their backs. "Can I come too?" "No," he said, without turning around. "Come on, please. I'll be a big help. I can do lots of things." "You're too young," he said sharply. "You're just a baby." The boys walked out. "You're just a baby." Jessie couldn't believe Evan had just said that, after all the stuff they'd done together. And he was only 14 months older than she was, hardly even a full year. She was about to yell back something really harsh, something stinging and full of bite, like, "Oh yeah?" when she heard Scott say to Evan, "Man, I can't believe you have to be in the same class as your little sister. If that happened to me, I'll move to South America." "Yeah, tell me about it," replied Evan, crossing the street. The words died on Jessie's lips. She watched Evan walking away, getting smaller and smaller. He was deserting her. He wasn't going to stand by her at school. He wasn't going to smooth the day for her. He wasn't going to be on the other side with all of them looking down on her, telling everyone that she was too young to be part of the crowd, telling everyone that she didn't belong. "Fine for you, Evan Tresky," she said as she marched into the house, her fist balled up by her sides. "I don't need you. I don't need you to have fun. I don't need you to run a lemonade stand, and I don't need you to make friends in the fourth grade." Halfway up the stairs, she stopped and shouted, "And I am not a baby." Chapter 3. Joint venture. This is also a noun. 2 or more people joining forces to sell a certain amount of goods or to work on a single project. When the goods are sold or the project is finished, the joint adventure begins. Your sister is really... Shut up, said Evan. Huh? Just shut up. She's okay. She doesn't... Look, she's okay. So just shut up. You okay? Said Scott, holding up his free hand to show he meant peace. Evan was getting abused on both sides. The heavy cooler was banging against his inside leg with every step, and the plastic chairs were scraping against his outside leg. Bruised and bloodied, he thought to himself, all for the fun of hanging out with Scott Spencer. Why couldn't Jack have been home? Or Ryan? Or why did Adam have to be on the Cape this week? It stunk. How far are we walking? Grunted Scott. Just to the corner. Evan watched as drops of sweat fell off his face and landed on the hot sidewalk. We should have stayed in the driveway. It was shaded. The corner's better, trust me, said Evan. He remembered when Jesse had said the same words to him last summer. They were setting up a lemonade stand together, and Evan had been grumbling about dragging the cooler across the street and down 2 houses, just like Scott. But Jessie had insisted, there's a sidewalk on this side, she said, so we'll get the foot traffic coming in both directions. And people in cars coming around the curve will have time to see us and slow down. Besides, there are a bunch of little kids on the side street, and their mothers won't want them to cross Damon Road. The corner's better. Trust me. And she was right. They made a ton of money that afternoon. It took 10 seconds to set up the lemonade stand. Evan unfolded the chairs and set one on each side of the cooler. Scott tilted the sign towards the street for maximum effect. Then they both sat down. Man, it is hot, said Evan. He took off his baseball cap and wiped his face from the sweat with his shirt. Then he grabbed an ice cube from the cooler, balanced it on his head, and stuck his cap back on. Yeah, said Scott. I'm thirsty. He reached into the paper bag and pulled out a cup. It was one of those large red plastic cups that vendors use at professional baseball games. Then Scott took one of the pitchers from the cooler and filled the cup to the brim with lemonade. Hey, not so much, said Evan, pouring himself a cup too, but only part way. He glugged down half his drink. Not bad, he thought, though he noticed a dead fruit fly floating on the top. His mom had been battling a mad fruit fly infestation ever since the weather had turned really warm. The kitchen sink area where they kept their fruit bowl was dotted with tiny, feathery fruit fly corpses. Scott drained his cup and tossed it on the ground. Ah, he said, satisfied. That was good. I'm gonna have another. Evan reached for the trashed cup and stowed it under his seat. Nah, come on, Scott. You're gonna drink all our profits if you do that. He stretched his legs out by putting his feet on top of the cooler. Just chill. I'm gonna chill by having another cup, said Scott. There it was, that mean bite in Scott's voice. Evan's shoulders tensed up. Move your feet, said Scott. It's hot out here. Dude, Evan sat up expectantly and looked down the street. Hey, here comes our first customer. A mother pushing a double stroller came into view. At the same time, one of the kindergartners from down the street rode her bike up, noticed the sign, and quickly pedaled back to her house. Within 5 minutes, there was a small crowd of neighborhood kids and pedestrians buying lemonade from the stand. Evan let Scott handle all the money while he took care of the pouring and the sweet talk. That's what his mother called it when a salesperson chatted her up. Trust me, she had once told Evan and Jesse, buying something is only half about getting something. The other half is all about human contact. Mrs. Tresky knew about these things because she was a public relations consultant. She'd even written a booklet called 10 Bright Ideas to Light Up Your Sales for one of her clients. And Evan was like her. He was good at talking with people, even grown-ups. It was easy for him. So he kept the conversation flowing along with the lemonade. People hung around. Most of them bought a second cup before they left. Evan was so busy, he almost didn't notice Jessie flying out of the garage on her bike and riding down the street towards town. Good riddance, he thought, but at the same time, he wondered where she was going. During a lull in business, Evan walked all around the stand, picking up the discarded plastic cups. Scott sat in his chair, jiggling the coins in his pocket. Man, we are going to be so rich, said Scott. I bet we made $5 already. I bet we made 10. How much do you think we made? Evan shrugged. He looked at the stack of used cups in his hand and counted the rims. 14. They sold 14 cups so far, and each cup of lemonade cost 50 cents. Evan heard Mrs. DeFazio's voice in his ear. Mrs. DeFazio had been his third-grade teacher, and she'd done everything she could to help Evan with his math. If 1 cup of lemonade sells for 50 cents and you sell 14 cups of lemonade, how much money have you made? Word problems. Evan hated word problems, and this one was impossible anyway. He was pretty sure the right equation was 14 times 50 equals. But how was he supposed to solve that? That was double-digit multiplication. There was no way he could do a problem like that. And besides, some of those 14 people had bought refills but used the same cup. How many? Evan didn't know. Still, he knew they made a pretty good amount of money. That estimate was close enough for him. How much do you think we could make if we sold it all? Asked Scott. I don't know, said Evan. Maybe $20. That sounded high, even to him. But Evan was an optimist. Do you really think? Both boys looked in the cooler. 3 pitchers were empty. They only had half a pitcher left. They only had half a pitcher left. You were pouring the cups too full, said Scott. You should have poured less in each one. You're the one who brought the huge plastic cups. You could fit a gallon in one of those, said Evan. Besides, I wasn't going to be chintzy. They're paying a whole $50 for it. They deserve a full cup. And anyway, we could just go home and make more. My mom has cans of lemonade in the freezer. So go home and make more, said Scott. Oh, yes, Your Majesty. Oh, High Commander, Your Infantness. Why don't you go make it? 'Cause I'm chilling, said Scott, leaning back in his chair with a stupid grin on his face. Evan knew he was just joking, But this was exactly why he didn't like Scott. He was always thinking of himself, always looking for some way to come out on top. If they were playing knockout, Scott always came up with a new rule that helped him win. If they were doing an assignment together, Scott always figured out how to divide it so he had less work to do. The kid was a weasel. No two ways about it. But everyone else was out of town. Evan didn't want to spend the day alone. And Jesse was on his poop list. And as mom called it, when the dog did something he wasn't supposed to do. Evan might never play with Jesse again. Evan crossed the street and went into the house. He was surprised to find that there were no more cans of lemonade in the freezer. Wow, there have been so many this morning. Luckily, there was a can of grape juice in the freezer and a bottle of ginger ale in the fridge. It'll work, he thought. People just want a cold drink. They don't care if it's not lemonade. He mixed up the grape juice at the sink. The fruit flies were more out of control than ever, thanks to the lemonade the boys had dribbled on the countertop. Evan swatted a couple, but most of them drifted out of his reach and settled on the fruit bowl. He wished his mother believed in chemical warfare, but for Mrs. Tresky, it was all natural or nothing, usually nothing. When he went back outside to the lemonade stand, Evan noticed that the last pitcher was turned upside down on the cooler. "Oh, come on, Scott," he said. "What? It was hot, and you said you could always make more." "Yeah, well, we didn't have as much in the house as I thought. I've got grape juice and ginger ale." "I hate ginger ale," Scott said. "I wouldn't give you a penny for it." It turned out that a lot of people felt the same way. Business was definitely slower. The day got hotter. The sun beat down on them so ferociously that it was easy to imagine the sidewalk cracking open and swallowing them whole. Fanning himself, Evan asked, "How much money do you really think we could make?" "I don't know," said Scott, pushing his baseball cap down over his eyes. "I mean, on a hot day like this," Evan said silently, adding the words, "or tomorrow. If we sold 8 pitchers of lemonade, what'd you think we'd each make?" 8 pitchers? I don't know. Scott shook his head. His baseball-capped face wagged back and forth. "Too hot for math. And it's summer." Evan pulled his red pen out of his pocket and started to write on the palm of his hand. 8 times question mark. 8 times 50 question mark. Blank divided by 2 question mark. That didn't seem right. Jessie would know. She'd do that math in a second. Evan capped his pen and jammed it into his pocket. "But I bet it's a lot," said Evan. "I bet on a hot day like this, we could actually make some real money in the lemonade business." "Yeah," said Scott. "Then we'd be rich, and I'd get an Xbox, the new one, with the dual controls." "I'd get an iPod," said Evan. He'd been saving for one for over a year, and every time he had some money put away, well, it just disappeared. Like the $10 from Grandma, she'd even written in her card, "Here's a little something to help you get that music thing you want." But the money was gone. He treated Paul and Ryan to slices of pizza at Townhouse. It had been fun. That would be so great to listen to music whenever I want, said Evan. I could I could tune you out, he added in his own head. They sat in silence, feeling the heat suck away every bit of their energy. Evan was hatching a plan. The heat wave was supposed to last at least 5 days. If he had a friend, not Scott, set up a lemonade stand every day for 5 days, he'd definitely have enough to buy an iPod. He imagined himself wearing it as he walked to school, wearing it on the playground. Hey, Megan. Yeah, it's my iPod. Sweet, huh? Wearing it in class when the teacher droned on about fractions and percents. Nah, but it would be so cool. At least there would be one thing that didn't totally stink about going back to school. After 2 hours, they decided to call it quits. Sales had dropped off fast and then stopped altogether. Hey, did you notice something? Asked Evan, stacking the chairs. What? Said Scott. When we started the stand, most of our business came from that direction. He pointed down the street, towards the curve in the road. But after an hour, not one person who walked past us from that direction bought a cup. Not one. They all said, no thanks, and kept on walking. Why do you think? Don't know, said Scott. Boy, you're a real go-getter, said Evan. You know that? Scott socked him in the chest, but Evan defended and knocked Scott's cap off. While Scott was scrambling for his hat, Evan said, just hang here for a minute, okay? And set off down the street. As soon as he rounded the curve, he knew why his business had fallen off so badly. There was Jesse and Megan from his class. They were standing inside a wooden booth, and their sign said it all. Lemonade, frosty, delicious, thirst quenching. Wow, only 50 cents per cup. By the looks of it, their business was booming. Evan watched as Jessie accepted a fistful of dollar bills from a mother surrounded by her kids. At that moment, Jessie looked up and saw him. Evan had a weird feeling, like he'd been caught cheating on the test. He wanted to run and hide somewhere. Instead, he froze. What would Jessie do? Evan couldn't believe it. She sneered at him. She cocked her head to the side and gave him this little, I'm so much better than you smile. And then, she waved the money in her hand at him. She waved it as if to say, look how much money we made selling lemonade. Bet you can't beat that. Evan turned on his heel and walked away. Behind him, he could hear Megan laughing at him. Clear as a bell. That was chapters 1 through 3 of the Lemonade War. Stay tuned next week for the next chapters.